Hello, folks. Thanks for joining us today. I'm with Alex Poukchanski from CRSP. Alex, tell us more about CRSP indexes.
Well, thank you for asking this question. CRSP has actually been producing indices since 1966. Our initial indices were geared towards academics, not the investment public, which meant that the focus of the original indices has been on most accurate representation of the US market, which implied daily rebalances. As you can imagine, this is not ideal for an investor looking for a passive exposure to US markets. So when we had a chance to design investable indices in partnership with Vanguard, one of the largest money managers in the world, we enthusiastically accepted that challenge. So the basis of all of our index products is CRSP Total Market Index, which covers almost 100% of US investable market universe. To create it, we start by first filtering securities on listing exchange, security and organization type, and then domicile rule that ensures that only securities that follow US companies and available to an investor with an ordinary brokerage account make it into the index. We next apply a liquidity rule filter to ensure that securities that are included in CRSP Total Market Index can be easily bought and sold. And finally, we weigh each security by the float-adjusted market capitalization that ensures that the weight of the company in the index represents what's available to the investor. Now, the result of all these methodologies is that CRSP Total Market Index captures the entire US investable market universe with over 4,000 companies as of the first quarter 2022. Now, a good index is not static. Instead, it changes to constantly capture the evolving universe of investors' opportunity set. So what we did is we actually borrowed from our historical indices to ensure that our CRSP Total Market Index is the most holistic and the most representative of the US market. Now that means two things. First, we include IPOs as fast as possible, and most IPOs get included in our index within 5 days of public offering. The second thing is it means that we are rebalancing it on a quarterly basis. Together, what it implies is that an investor following CRSP Total Market Index gets the most holistic, the most representative view of the US market. From the very beginning, we also decided to do one other thing. We decided to minimize unnecessary trading costs to the investor. What it meant is to reduce the turnover, which is another term that this thing is known for. We use bans to prevent companies from moving from adjacent categories without a clear signal. And we also use packaging to ensure that when the company does move, let's say from small to mid, it does it in steps. The result of these methodologies has been that funds that follow our index have up to 50% less turnover than funds in a similar category. But we believe that this methodology also does a better job of reflecting ambiguity that is inherent with the style and size definitions. Now, style and size do not have objective definitions in the finance. Instead, they reflect the different views of different investors. So some investors may think that a particular company is a small, others may think it's mid. Some investors may think it's a value, and other investors may think it's growth. And so our methodology reflects that ambiguity during the transition period. Finally, all our indices do rebalancing over 5 trading days instead of a single day. We believe that it's a better approach, and it also is reflective of active money managers, of how they trade to avoid trading costs. Now, I can talk about it for a long time, as you can guess, but I would encourage your audience to visit us at CRSP.org and to reach out to us if they have specific questions.
Okay, well, what's next for CRSP?
Well, thank you for asking. As an index provider, CRSP always looks for new data that may help investors gain insight into the stock market. So ESG, or environmental, social, and governance data, offers an interesting insight in companies' operations that could be of use to the investors. And this is why we launched CRSP ISS ESG indices in September of 2021.
Okay.
Now, whenever we begin work on a new product, we first focus on the data and try to make sure that the data is the most accurate and the most unbiased data we can possibly get. So after reviewing ESG data, we settled on ISS ESG as a data provider. We chose them for a couple of reasons. First, given that there's a lack of standardization in ESG reporting, we thought that ISS approach of reaching out to companies and clarifying the data ensured that the data was most accurate without the dangers of greenwashing. Note that ISS and investors' interest in data accuracy are very well aligned. Second, we liked ISS methodology that enabled drilling deep into the ESG score and understanding how each ESG metric contributed to the overall ESG score for the company. This is particularly important to the investors who are trying to understand how companies' different initiatives, be it environmental, social, or governance, impact its score. And finally, ISS, just like CRSP, has a long history in the financial markets of putting investor interests first. And we thought that it was most clearly aligned with CRSP principle that the best approach to understanding financial markets is through unbiased and rigorous analysis and research. So after we settled on the data, the next process was to make sure that our index design is transparent in how the ESG score creates the portfolios, which is why our CRSP ISS ESG industry indices suite is composed of 3 pairs of indices. Within each pair, there are 2 siblings. One sibling presents qualifying companies, the ones that make the threshold. And the other one, the remainder, is the non-qualifying companies that are below the threshold. Note that the only difference between these 3 pairs is where we set the ESG breakpoint. So for example, we have CRSP ISS ESG Prime. That's the companies that ISS defines as best in class based on the ESG score. We also have CRSP ISS ESG pair of indices, which splits our CRSP US large cap into half, with 50% of the companies in ESG and 50% of the companies in the remainder. And finally, we have CRSP ISS ESG industry balanced index, which ensures that each sector is being represented, which means that we split each sector in half. 50% of the companies in the sector goes to ESG, and 50% of the companies goes into the remainder. Now, note that all of our indices, none of them have arbitrary exclusions, right? We let the data decide where the companies end. And we also make sure that the investors have access to the performance of both ESG and the other non-qualifying indices so that they better understand the trade-offs of their investment decisions. Now, at this point, our ESG is focusing on CRSP US large cap, which covers 85% of the investable market, or roughly the top 580 companies. But we are looking forward to expanding our ESG offering to the small cap and eventually to our flagship CRSP Total Market Index. Now, in doing so, what we would do is we would advance our ESG investment without compromising our rigorous and unbiased approach to index creation. So thank you for asking that.
All right. Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you for joining us for this fast chat and learning more about CRSP.